When a teenage girl mysteriously vanished during summer camp, her best friend never gave up hope. Years later, an old forgotten cabin and a strange, cryptic map reignite a chilling secret. One that could finally reveal what really happened. But some truths are darker than anyone imagined. The air was thick with excitement as Emma and Lily bounced along the winding road leading to Camp Willowbrook. The old bus rattled with every bump, but they didn't care. They were together, ready for the summer of their lives. Emma had braided a friendship bracelet the night before, purple and green, their favorite colors, and Lily wore it proudly on her wrist. The camp sat nestled in a sprawling forest, its rustic cabins and glittering lake welcoming the arrival of eager campers. It had been their plan for years, to spend a summer under the stars, swapping ghost stories and exploring the secret nooks of the forest. Their first night, as the sky bled from gold to indigo, they huddled around the campfire with the others, listening to the counselors recount stories of the Whispering Pines, a cursed patch of forest where voices called out to those who dared to wander too close. Lily, ever the bold one, whispered to Emma, "We should check it out." Emma felt a chill, but laughed it off, knowing Lily's love for adventure. The days melted into a routine of hiking, swimming, and late-night storytelling. One evening, after an unexpected thunderstorm, Lily convinced Emma to explore the lake's edge despite the soggy ground. As they tiptoed through the fog, Lily suddenly stopped, pointing toward a peculiar rock formation that looked like a circle of stones, half submerged in the mud. "That wasn't there before," Lily murmured, bending down to trace one of the symbols etched into the largest stone. The fog thickened, and suddenly a loud crack of thunder sent them sprinting back to their cabin, laughter mingling with their fear. Later that night, as the rain battered the roof, Emma awoke to find Lily's bed empty. Thinking her friend had snuck out for a prank or midnight snack, Emma slipped on her shoes and crept outside. But Lily wasn't at the mess hall, nor by the lake. Panic settled in when, by dawn, Lily still hadn't returned. The camp was thrown into chaos as counselors scoured the woods, calling her name. The police arrived, and search parties combed the forest, but it was as if Lily had simply vanished. Emma couldn't shake the memory of the stone circle, wondering if the curse of the Whispering Pines was more than just a story. Days stretched into weeks, and the camp closed early. Emma left Willowbrook without her best friend, her mind a tangle of fear and guilt. Even as the seasons changed and life moved on, Emma remained haunted by that summer, by the echoes of Lily's laughter now buried beneath the silence of the woods. The world didn't stop for Lily's disappearance. Camp Willowbrook became a grim legend, a place where parents whispered warnings and locals spoke of a curse renewed. For Emma, time felt heavy, dragging her through school and life, always colored by the absence of her friend. She couldn't forget the last night, the thunder, the stones, and the fog that seemed almost alive. Emma's parents tried to console her, urging her to see a counselor, but no one could ease the gnawing guilt. She often dreamt of the woods, Lily's voice calling her name through the dense thickets, always just out of reach. On her desk sat an old photo of them from camp, arms around each other, grinning wide. The bracelet Lily had worn that summer lay next to it, the purple and green threads frayed at the edges. As high school turned into college, Emma grew quieter, her vibrant spirit dulled. She joined a hiking club, hoping that time outdoors would help her make sense of what happened. Every trail seemed to whisper to her, and sometimes she thought she saw a flicker of Lily's blonde hair among the trees. She wondered if she was losing her grip on reality, or if some part of Lily was still calling out to her. One rainy evening, as Emma sorted through an old box of camp memorabilia, she found a journal she had kept that summer. Flipping through the pages, she found a drawing of the stone circle Lily had discovered. Next to it, Lily's messy handwriting read, "Secret place by the lake. Maybe something ancient?" A chill ran through Emma, and her pulse quickened as memories of that night surged back. Just as she considered revisiting the camp herself, her phone buzzed. A familiar name popped up on the screen. Tom, one of the old camp counselors. He was organizing a reunion for the last group that attended Camp Willowbrook before it shut down. Emma's heart pounded as she read the message. She hadn't spoken to anyone from camp in years, the painful memories too raw to revisit. Yet, something stirred inside her, a pull, a need for answers. Should she go back? Logic told her to decline, to stay away from that cursed place. But Emma knew that she couldn't keep running from her past. Maybe returning would give her a sense of closure. Maybe it would help her finally say goodbye. Her hands trembled as she typed a quick reply. "I'll be there." As the date approached, anxiety twisted inside her like thorny vines. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find. Maybe just a conversation, a hint that someone knew more than they had admitted. Or maybe, deep down, she hoped that stepping back into those woods would somehow bring Lily back. On the morning of the reunion, as Emma packed her bag, she glanced at the friendship bracelet one last time and tucked it into her pocket. Taking a deep breath, she stepped outside, ready to face the mystery that had haunted her for years. The drive back to Camp Willowbrook felt like a journey through time. Emma's heart pounded as she watched the dense trees close in on either side of the narrow road. Memories of sunlit trails and whispered secrets filled her mind. But darker images lingered, too. The endless search parties, the sound of her own frantic calls echoing through the mist. She pulled into the gravel parking lot, the tires crunching loudly in the otherwise silent morning. The old wooden sign that once read, "Welcome to Camp Willowbrook," had long since faded, its letters barely visible beneath a blanket of creeping ivy. Emma's fingers tightened around the worn leather of her steering wheel. She considered turning back, but a flicker of movement in her rearview mirror caught her attention, a figure emerging from the shadowed path leading to the main lodge. It was Tom, his frame a bit heavier, his hair graying at the temples, but his easy grin still familiar. He waved as Emma stepped out of her car, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. "Emma, it's been forever," he called, pulling her into a tight hug. She forced a smile, her heart still racing. As they walked toward the old lodge, Emma took in the sight of the familiar, weather-beaten cabins, their roofs sagging under the weight of years. The old mess hall stood silently, its windows fogged with grime, and the lake glimmered in the distance, its surface disturbingly calm. Inside, a small group had gathered, the last remnants of the campers from that summer. Emma recognized a few faces, their features aged but unmistakable. Sarah, the arts and crafts counselor, gave a small wave, her eyes wary. Jake, the lifeguard who had once tried to teach Emma to dive, offered a tight-lipped smile. As they exchanged small talk, Emma felt the air grow heavier, the unspoken shadow of Lily's disappearance pressing down on them. After an awkward round of introductions and stilted reminiscing, Tom cleared his throat. "I know this place holds a lot of memories for all of us," he said, his gaze shifting to the cracked stone fireplace. "Good ones and, well, ones we'd probably rather forget. But I thought it might be good for us to come together, share our stories, maybe find some closure." Emma's stomach tightened. Closure. That word felt too final, too dismissive. She glanced around the room, her eyes catching on a faded photograph pinned to the wall. It was a group picture from the summer Lily disappeared. Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she spotted their younger selves, arms around each other, the sun casting a golden glow on their carefree smiles. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Tom suggested a walk down to the old cabins. Emma hesitated, but the others agreed, their footsteps crunching against the leaf-strewn path. The woods felt different now, darker, more secretive, as if the trees themselves had absorbed the whispers of that tragic summer. When they reached the row of cabins, Emma's heart twisted. Cabin 5, the one she had shared with Lily, stood at the end, its wooden steps warped and splintered. She approached slowly, her hand trembling as she pushed open the door. Dust motes swirled in the dim light, and the air was thick with the musty scent of damp wood and forgotten memories. As the others wandered off to explore, Emma knelt by the old bunk beds, brushing her fingers against the carved initials they had scratched into the headboard. E+L, best friends forever. She felt a sudden urge to search the room, pulling open drawers and lifting the thin mattress. She was about to give up when her hand brushed against a loose floorboard near the corner. Heart pounding, she pried it up, revealing a small, hollowed-out space beneath. Inside, half buried in the dust, was a folded piece of parchment, its edges yellowed with age. Emma's breath caught as she unfolded it, her eyes widening at the sight of a hand-drawn map, its surface marked with cryptic symbols and a bold, red X near the lake. Emma's pulse quickened as she studied the map, her fingers tracing the winding paths and strange, looping symbols. The ink had faded, but the lines were clear, a rough outline of the campgrounds, stretching into the dense forest beyond. The red X near the lake sent a chill down her spine. She remembered the circle of stones she and Lily had stumbled upon that stormy night, their strange, twisting patterns glowing faintly in the mist. "What is this?" she whispered, her breath fogging the cool, stale air. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Lily to be standing there, her mischievous grin daring Emma to follow the map's path. Shaking off the eerie thought, she carefully folded the map and slipped it into her jacket pocket. As she stepped back outside, the sun hung low, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. The others had moved further down the trail, their voices muffled by the thick underbrush. Emma hesitated, her gaze drifting to the path that led to the lake. It felt like the trees themselves were urging her forward, their branches bending slightly, their leaves whispering secrets in the rising breeze. She took a deep breath and started down the path, the map a comforting weight in her pocket. The familiar crunch of pine needles underfoot brought back a flood of memories, sneaking out for midnight swims, racing through the woods with Lily at her side, their laughter echoing through the trees. As she approached the lake, the air grew colder, and the silence deepened. The water lay still, a perfect mirror reflecting the darkening sky. Emma's breath quickened as she reached the clearing where the circle of stones should have been. She scanned the ground, her pulse throbbing in her ears, but the stones were gone, buried beneath years of fallen leaves and creeping moss. But something glinted in the mud at the water's edge, a small, knotted band of thread. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she knelt to pick it up. It was frayed and dirty, but she recognized it instantly. The purple and green friendship bracelet she had braided for Lily all those years ago. As her fingers closed around the bracelet, a sharp, chilling whisper drifted through the trees, sending goosebumps prickling down her arms. She spun around, but the woods stood silent, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emma's breath hitched as she realized she had crossed an unseen threshold. She wasn't just walking through the past anymore. She had stepped into the heart of a mystery that refused to die. Emma's fingers tightened around the frayed bracelet as she stood by the lake, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air felt heavier here, thick with an unspoken weight that pressed against her chest. She looked around, half expecting Lily to emerge from the fog-covered water, dripping and breathless, laughing at the prank. But the lake remained silent, its surface smooth and dark, reflecting the first glimmers of starlight. The map felt like a burning brand in her jacket pocket, and she quickly pulled it out, her eyes darting across its cryptic lines. The X near the lake pulsed in her mind, its bold slash a silent dare. She stepped closer to the water's edge, the mud sucking at her shoes, the cold seeping through her thin jeans. As she bent down to examine the area, a sharp breeze whipped across the lake, sending a shiver down her spine. The water lapped gently at the shore, and for a moment, Emma thought she heard a faint whisper rising from the depths, a soft, lilting voice she hadn't heard in years. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. The ground beneath her feet felt strange, softer, almost hollow. Emma dropped to her knees, brushing aside the thick layer of wet leaves and tangled roots. Her heart raced as her fingers scraped against something hard and smooth, buried just beneath the surface. She dug faster, dirt and mud caking her hands, until a small, flat stone emerged, its surface etched with the same swirling symbols she had seen on the map. Emma leaned closer, brushing the mud away to reveal a carved spiral surrounded by jagged, intersecting lines, a symbol that felt disturbingly familiar. She racked her brain, struggling to place it, when a distant memory flashed through her mind. The circle of stones she and Lily had found that night before the storm, the one that had glowed faintly in the mist. Emma's pulse quickened as she realized this was no ordinary rock. It was a marker, a sign that she was standing at the very spot the map had pointed her to. She carefully lifted the stone, its cool weight pressing into her palms. Underneath, the earth had been disturbed, the roots twisted as if something had forced its way up from below. She hesitated, her mind screaming at her to turn back, but the thought of Lily, of her best friend, lost and forgotten, pushed her forward. As she dug deeper, her fingers brushed against something softer, smoother. She pulled it free, her breath catching in her throat as a small leather pouch tumbled into her lap. It was tied tightly with a piece of string, the knot stiff and brittle with age. Emma's fingers trembled as she untied it, her heart thundering in her ears. Inside, she found a small metal locket, its surface tarnished but still recognizable. Emma's breath hitched as she flipped it open, revealing a tiny, faded photo of two girls grinning up at the camera, their arms wrapped around each other. It was her and Lily, their faces younger, their smiles brighter. Her hand flew to her mouth, the cold metal pressing into her palm. She remembered this locket. Lily had worn it every day that summer, a gift from her grandmother. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, the weight of the locket pulling her back to a time when they had been inseparable, when their biggest fear was losing a game of capture the flag. As she sat back on her heels, the night air seemed to close in around her, the rustling leaves whispering secrets too old to remember. Emma clenched the locket tightly, her mind racing with questions. Why had Lily's locket been buried here, so close to the lake? And why had the map led her back to this spot? As she rose to her feet, the first stars broke through the darkening sky, their cold, distant light casting long shadows across the ground. Emma slipped the locket into her pocket, her jaw set, her mind already turning to the next step. She had come too far to turn back now. Emma stumbled back to the main trail, her mind buzzing with a mix of fear and determination. The locket felt like a lead weight in her pocket, its cold metal pressing against her thigh with every step. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, but the image of Lily's face, forever frozen in that tiny photo, burned in her mind. As she pushed through the dense underbrush, memories of that last summer surged back, the whispers around the campfire, the late-night dares, and the way Lily had always laughed off the ghost stories, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. Emma recalled the time they had overheard the counselors talking about strange disappearances in the nearby town, about how the locals whispered of a curse that hung over the woods. Emma had brushed it off at the time, just another spooky tale to scare the younger campers. But now, with the map in her hand and the locket in her pocket, she couldn't ignore the possibility that those stories held a kernel of truth. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow moving between the trees, but the forest remained silent, its tangled branches reaching for the sky like twisted fingers. As she reached the clearing near the cabins, the air grew colder, the shadows stretching longer across the ground. She paused, catching her breath, her eyes scanning the treeline for any sign of movement. A sudden rustling to her left made her heart leap into her throat, and she whipped around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just the wind stirring the leaves, their dry, brittle whispers carrying a faint echo of laughter. Emma's pulse slowed, but a prickling at the back of her neck told her she wasn't alone. She took a step back, her shoes crunching on the gravel path, and felt her fingers tighten around the flashlight's grip. As she continued down the trail, her mind drifted back to that final night with Lily. The storm, the shadows, the way the air had felt heavy and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. She remembered the way Lily had clutched her arm, whispering about the stones and their strange, glowing patterns. Emma's steps quickened, her breath coming in sharp bursts as she reached the cabin. She flung the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stumbled inside. The darkness felt oppressive, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten memories. She flicked on her flashlight, the beam slicing through the dust-filled air, and caught a glimpse of their old bunk beds, the wood scarred and splintered from years of use. Emma moved to the corner where she had found the map, her heart racing as she dropped to her knees and peered into the small, hollowed-out space beneath the floorboard. Her fingers brushed against something sharp, and she pulled back, her pulse pounding in her ears. A single, jagged piece of metal lay at the bottom of the compartment, its surface covered in the same swirling patterns as the stone she had found by the lake. Emma's hand trembled as she lifted it into the light, the symbols glowing faintly, their edges sharp and unforgiving. She sank back onto her heels, the darkness pressing in around her, and felt a chill creep down her spine. Whatever had happened that summer, whatever had taken Lily, it wasn't just a coincidence. The pieces were falling into place, and Emma knew she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth, even if it meant facing the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the jagged metal piece, its cold surface biting into her palm. The symbols etched into it seemed to pulse in the dim flashlight beam, their twisted patterns whispering secrets she couldn't quite grasp. She leaned back against the rough cabin wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her mind struggling to process what she had just uncovered. She carefully set the metal shard down beside the locket on the floor, her eyes darting to the small, hollowed-out space beneath the loose floorboard. Something about the compartment felt deliberate, as if someone had carefully hidden these pieces, hoping they would one day be found. Emma reached back inside, her fingers brushing against the rough wood, and felt a series of deep, carefully carved lines along the bottom. She leaned closer, her flashlight casting sharp shadows across the splintered wood. The lines formed a series of overlapping spirals, each one intersecting the next, creating a dizzying, hypnotic pattern. Emma's pulse quickened as she traced the shapes, her fingers tingling with the same electric energy she had felt at the lake. A sudden memory flashed through her mind. That night by the circle of stones, the way the air had felt charged, the ground humming beneath her feet. She remembered the strange symbols glowing in the mist, the way Lily had knelt beside the largest stone, her fingers tracing the same spirals now etched into the cabin floor. Emma's heart raced as she pulled back, her mind struggling to piece together the fragments of a long-buried mystery. She leaned against the wall, her eyes darting around the cabin as if the ghost of her best friend might materialize at any moment, her laughter echoing through the dusty air. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering before cutting out entirely. Emma gasped, her heart leaping into her throat as the cabin plunged into darkness. She fumbled with the switch, her fingers slick with sweat, but the flashlight remained dead, its beam swallowed by the oppressive shadows. She froze, straining to hear over the sound of her own ragged breaths, and felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the cabin walls, she heard it, the faint, lilting sound of a girl's voice, drifting through the trees like a distant echo. Emma clapped a hand over her mouth, her pulse pounding in her ears. The voice grew louder, clearer, the words slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls, each syllable wrapped in the chilling cadence of a long-forgotten song. She squeezed her eyes shut, her mind screaming for her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed by a mix of terror and grief. As the voice reached its peak, the flashlight in her hand suddenly flared back to life, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. Emma gasped, her eyes flying open as the shadows retreated, the cabin once again bathed in the harsh, flickering light. She stumbled to her feet, her heart hammering in her chest, and grabbed the locket and metal shard from the floor. Without a second glance at the spirals etched into the wood, she bolted for the door, her feet slipping on the loose gravel as she stumbled down the cabin steps and into the dense underbrush. Emma didn't stop running until she reached the main trail, her breaths coming in sharp, panicked gasps, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She clutched the locket tightly, its sharp edges digging into her palm, and forced herself to keep moving, the cabin's whispered secrets echoing in her mind. Whatever had happened that summer, whatever had taken Lily, it wasn't finished yet. And as Emma stumbled through the shadows, the forest around her seemed to come alive, the trees bending low as if listening, their twisted branches reaching for her like skeletal fingers. Emma didn't stop until she reached the edge of the lake, her legs shaking, her lungs burning from the icy night air. She collapsed onto the rocky shore, her breaths coming in ragged gasps, her mind reeling from the sudden burst of fear and adrenaline. The locket felt like a live coal in her pocket, its presence both a comfort and a reminder of the nightmare she had just escaped. As the moon broke through the tangled canopy above, casting a cold, silver light across the lake's surface, Emma forced herself to sit up, her eyes scanning the dark water for any sign of movement. The air felt thick and heavy, the shadows clinging to the trees like ancient memories, their branches swaying gently in a breeze she couldn't feel. She pulled the locket from her pocket, its cold surface glinting in the moonlight. With trembling hands, she flipped it open, staring down at the tiny, faded photograph of herself and Lily, their arms wrapped around each other, their faces lit with the carefree joy of a summer long gone. Emma's throat tightened, a fresh wave of grief crashing over her. She closed her eyes, the sound of the lake lapping gently at the shore mingling with the echo of Lily's laughter in her mind. As she sat there, the locket clutched tightly in her palm, a sudden thought struck her. The spirals carved into the cabin floor, the same spirals etched into the metal shard she had found, the same spirals that had glowed in the mist that night by the stone circle. They weren't just random designs. They were a map, a guide, a message hidden in plain sight. Emma's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. She scrambled to pull the parchment map from her jacket pocket, her fingers fumbling in the dim light. She flattened the crumpled paper against a nearby rock, her eyes darting across the twisting lines and cryptic symbols. The X near the lake, the spirals, the hidden compartment in the cabin. It was all connected, a puzzle left behind for her to solve, a breadcrumb trail leading her deeper into the heart of the mystery. As the wind whispered through the trees, sending ripples across the lake's dark surface, Emma felt a sudden flicker of hope, a tiny, fragile spark that cut through the darkness, pushing back the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Whatever had taken Lily, whatever force had pulled her into the shadows that summer, it had left a path back. And as Emma traced the lines of the map with her trembling fingers, she vowed to follow it, no matter where it might lead. Emma's heart raced as she folded the crumpled map and stuffed it back into her jacket pocket. The wind rustled the leaves around her, sending a shiver down her spine as she rose to her feet. She glanced back at the cabin, its dark, empty windows staring back at her like hollow eyes, and felt a sudden surge of defiance. Whatever secrets it held, whatever forces had taken Lily, she would face them. She had come too far to turn back now. The trail leading deeper into the forest was overgrown, the underbrush thick and tangled, but Emma forced her way through, her flashlight casting long, twisted shadows as the branches closed in around her. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow her whole. As she pushed through the dense foliage, her mind raced with fragments of half-remembered stories, whispers around the campfire, tales of strange figures moving through the trees, of ghostly lights flickering in the mist. She remembered the way the counselors had warned them to stay close to the cabins at night, their voices tinged with a fear they tried to hide behind nervous laughter. The path twisted and turned, the roots beneath her feet like skeletal hands reaching up from the soil, their gnarled fingers snagging her shoes and threatening to trip her. Emma's breath came in short, panicked bursts, her pulse pounding in her ears. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a lifeline, and forced herself to keep moving. After what felt like hours, the trees suddenly thinned, the underbrush giving way to a wide, moonlit clearing. Emma stumbled to a halt, her chest heaving as she took in the sight before her. At the center of the clearing, half hidden beneath a thick layer of leaves and moss, stood a circle of stones, their surfaces etched with the same swirling patterns she had seen on the metal shard and cabin floor. Emma's heart raced as she stepped closer, her flashlight casting sharp, jagged shadows across the ancient stones. She knelt beside the largest one, her fingers trembling as she traced the familiar spirals carved into its rough surface. The air felt charged, the ground beneath her vibrating with a low, almost imperceptible hum, like the forest itself was holding its breath. She reached for the metal shard in her pocket, its cool, jagged edges biting into her palm as she carefully placed it into the center of the circle. For a moment, nothing happened. The forest remained silent, the shadows still. But then, slowly, the symbols on the stone began to glow, their spirals pulsing with a faint, ghostly light. Emma gasped, stumbling back as the ground beneath the circle trembled, the stones vibrating in perfect harmony with the low hum that filled the air. The light grew brighter, the spirals spinning faster, their lines blurring as the air around her crackled with energy. Suddenly, the light flared, a blinding flash that forced Emma to shield her eyes. She felt the ground shift beneath her, the stones grinding against each other as the circle came to life, the ancient patterns twisting and shifting as if awakening from a long slumber. When the light finally faded, Emma slowly lowered her hands, her eyes widening as she took in the transformed clearing. The stones now stood taller, their surfaces smooth and unblemished, the spirals glowing with a steady, pulsing light. The air felt alive, electric, the ground beneath her feet humming with the promise of secrets long hidden. Emma reached for the locket around her neck, her fingers brushing against the cool metal as she took a deep, steadying breath. Whatever lay at the heart of this mystery, whatever had taken Lily, she was one step closer to finding it. Emma's pulse raced as she stepped back from the glowing stone circle, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. She clutched the locket tightly, the cold metal pressing into her palm, its presence both a comfort and a reminder of the friend she had come here to find. As the light pulsed around her, the air seemed to grow heavier, the shadows lengthening as the trees leaned in, their twisted branches creaking softly in the sudden stillness. Emma glanced around, her heart hammering in her chest, and felt a chill creep down her spine as a low, whispering voice drifted through the clearing. At first, the words were too faint to make out, a distant, echoing murmur that sent goosebumps prickling along her arms. But as the light from the stones grew brighter, the whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping in a chaotic, haunting chorus. Emma clapped her hands over her ears, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the voices grew louder, their words twisted and broken, each syllable tinged with a desperate, pleading tone. Emma. She froze, her heart skipping a beat as the whispers shifted, their chaotic tones blending into a single, familiar voice. A voice she hadn't heard in years. Emma, please. Her breath caught in her throat, her eyes stinging with sudden, unbidden tears as the voice wrapped around her, pulling her back to that last summer, to the nights spent whispering secrets beneath the stars, to the way Lily had laughed, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous light. Lily. Emma choked, her voice trembling as the whispers swirled around her, the stones pulsing faster, their spirals spinning in perfect sync with her racing pulse. The wind whipped through the clearing, the branches swaying wildly as the ground beneath her trembled, the stones glowing brighter with each passing second. Emma stumbled back, her shoes slipping on the loose, shifting soil as the air around her grew colder, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. Emma, find me. The voice cut through the chaos, its tone sharp and desperate, the words echoing in her mind long after the wind had died down and the stones had returned to their silent, motionless state. Emma fell to her knees, her breath coming in short, shuddering gasps as the clearing fell silent once more, the air thick with the ghost of her best friend's plea. She clutched the locket tightly, her fingers trembling as the last echoes of Lily's voice faded into the night. Emma closed her eyes, the tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered into the darkness, her voice raw and broken. I'm coming, Lily. I promise. I'll find you. Emma stumbled back from the glowing stone circle, her mind spinning, her heart pounding in her chest. The air around her felt heavy, charged with the same electric energy she had felt that night by the lake all those years ago. She clutched the locket tightly, its sharp edges digging into her palm, the cool metal a small anchor in the swirling chaos. She took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the cold, damp air of the clearing, and forced herself to stand. The stones around her had returned to their original, silent state, the spirals on their surfaces no longer glowing, but still pulsing with a faint, hidden energy. Emma's fingers trembled as she reached down to pick up the metal shard, its jagged edges gleaming in the moonlight. She carefully slipped it back into her jacket pocket, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. What had she just witnessed? What had brought the stones to life? And why had Lily's voice echoed through the clearing, her pleas cutting through the darkness like a knife? As she turned to leave the clearing, a sudden rustling in the trees behind her made her freeze, her pulse spiking as the shadows seemed to close in around her. She whipped around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the underbrush remained still, the twisted branches swaying gently in the breeze. Emma took a cautious step back, her heart hammering in her chest as she scanned the treeline, her eyes straining to pierce the darkness. She took another step back, her shoe crunching on a loose stone, and felt a sudden, icy chill creep down her spine as the shadows seemed to ripple, the darkness shifting as if something unseen moved between the trees. She took a deep, steadying breath, her mind screaming at her to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed by a mix of fear and determination. She had come too far to turn back now, too close to the truth to let the shadows scare her away. As the wind whispered through the trees, Emma took another step back, her hand tightening around the locket as she forced herself to move. She stumbled over a twisted root, her flashlight swinging wildly as she caught her balance, her heart racing as the shadows seemed to close in around her. Suddenly, the air grew colder, the wind whipping through the clearing with a sharp, biting force. Emma gasped, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts as the shadows swirled around her, the trees groaning and creaking as if whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. She turned and bolted for the trail, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she tore through the underbrush, her feet slipping on the damp, uneven ground. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches reaching for her like skeletal fingers, their twisted forms casting long, jagged shadows that clawed at the ground around her. Emma's breath burned in her throat, her muscles screaming in protest as she pushed herself harder, the darkness closing in around her, the whispers growing louder, their voices blending into a chaotic, haunting chorus. She stumbled over a fallen log, her flashlight slipping from her grasp as she crashed to the ground, her palms scraping against the rough, damp earth. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her ears, and snatched up the flashlight, its beam flickering weakly as she staggered back to the trail. She forced herself to keep moving, her mind racing with the echoes of Lily's voice, her desperate plea cutting through the chaos like a blade. As she stumbled back onto the main trail, the trees slowly parted, the darkness receding as the moon broke through the tangled branches, casting a cold, silver light across the ground. Emma collapsed onto her knees, her chest heaving, her fingers clutching the locket so tightly that the metal cut into her skin. She closed her eyes, her mind reeling, the whispers still echoing in her ears as the forest around her fell silent once more. Whatever had awakened in the clearing, whatever force had called to her, it wasn't finished yet. And as Emma forced herself to her feet, her mind racing with fear and determination, she knew that the final, terrifying pieces of the puzzle were waiting for her just ahead. Emma's breaths came in ragged gasps as she leaned against a tree, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, her fingers coming away streaked with dirt and dried blood from her scraped palms. The forest around her felt alive, the twisted branches swaying gently in a wind she could not feel, their skeletal fingers reaching for the sky like the hands of the long-forgotten dead. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking as she took a cautious step back onto the trail, her flashlight flickering weakly in her hand. The shadows seemed to retreat, the darkness pulling back as the moonlight cut through the trees, casting sharp, twisted shapes across the ground. Emma tightened her grip on the flashlight, her fingers still trembling as she took another step forward, her mind racing with the echoes of Lily's voice, her desperate plea still ringing in her ears. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadow moving between the trees, but the forest remained silent, the air thick with the heavy, oppressive weight of forgotten memories. As she continued down the trail, her heart still racing, Emma felt a sudden chill creep down her spine, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end as the wind whispered through the trees, its sharp, biting chill cutting through her thin jacket. She tightened her grip on the locket, its cold metal pressing into her palm as she pushed deeper into the forest, the shadows growing longer, the darkness closing in around her once more. After what felt like an eternity, the trail suddenly veered sharply to the left, the trees parting to reveal a narrow, overgrown path that wound its way down a steep, rocky slope. Emma hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared down the dark, twisted path, its uneven, crumbling stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. She took a deep breath, the air cold and sharp in her lungs, and forced herself to take the first step, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as she slowly made her way down the forgotten path. The trees leaned in closer, their branches scraping against her jacket, their twisted forms casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the ground like the flickering flames of a dying fire. As Emma reached the bottom of the slope, the air grew colder, the ground beneath her feet vibrating with a low, almost imperceptible hum. She paused, her heart racing as she glanced around, the shadows shifting and twisting as if alive, their dark, tangled forms reaching for her like the grasping hands of the lost. She took another step forward, her flashlight flickering weakly, and felt the ground beneath her feet give way, the dirt crumbling beneath her weight as she stumbled forward, her hands reaching out to catch herself as the darkness closed in around her. Emma gasped, her pulse racing as the ground seemed to swallow her whole, the shadows wrapping around her like a shroud, their whispered secrets echoing in her mind as the world around her fell away. Emma tumbled through the darkness, her arms flailing as the ground gave way beneath her. She felt herself falling, the cold, damp air rushing past her as the world spun wildly around her. She landed hard, her shoulders slamming into the rocky ground, the impact jarring her teeth and sending a sharp, burning pain shooting down her arm. For a moment, she lay there in the darkness, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. She reached for her flashlight, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the switch, and breathed a shaky sigh of relief as the beam flared to life, cutting through the shadows that pressed in around her. Emma slowly sat up, her muscles aching, her heart still racing as she took in her surroundings. She had fallen into a narrow, rock-lined tunnel, its jagged walls pressing in on either side of her, the air thick with the musty, metallic scent of damp earth and ancient stone. She reached up, her fingers brushing against the crumbling dirt above her, and realized with a sinking feeling that the ground she had fallen through had already sealed itself behind her, the loose soil collapsing into place like a trapdoor. Panic surged through her, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps as the weight of the earth pressed down on her, the darkness closing in around her like a living, breathing thing. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking, her flashlight beam flickering as she swung it around, her eyes darting over the twisted, uneven walls of the tunnel. The spirals. They were everywhere, carved into the stone around her, their twisted lines overlapping in a dizzying, hypnotic pattern that seemed to pulse in the flashlight's flickering glow. Emma reached out, her fingers trembling as she traced the lines, the cool, damp stone biting into her skin as a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the tunnel, the sound cutting through the darkness like a whip. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat as the ground beneath her shifted, the stones grinding against each other as the walls around her trembled. Emma stumbled back, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly as the spirals on the walls began to glow, their lines pulsing with the same ghostly light she had seen in the clearing, the air around her growing colder with each passing second. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, the stones shifting as the tunnel stretched and twisted around her, the walls bending and warping as if alive. Emma clutched the locket around her neck, the cold metal pressing into her skin as the tunnel slowly straightened, the spirals on the walls spinning faster, their lines blurring as the darkness closed in around her. A sudden, icy wind whipped through the tunnel, the air around her crackling with energy as the spirals reached their peak, their glowing lines pulsing with a blinding, white-hot light. Emma shielded her eyes, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as the tunnel shuddered around her, the stones grinding together as the ground beneath her feet seemed to drop away once more. When the light finally faded, Emma slowly lowered her hands, her eyes blinking against the sudden darkness. She took a shaky step forward, her heart still racing as the air around her grew colder, the tunnel stretching out before her like a twisted, living thing, its walls lined with the same spirals that had haunted her every step. Emma tightened her grip on the flashlight, her fingers trembling as she forced herself to move, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as she stumbled deeper into the darkness, the spirals around her spinning faster, their lines blurring as the tunnel seemed to stretch and twist around her, the walls closing in as the air grew colder, the darkness thicker, the whispers louder. Emma's pulse raced as she stumbled through the twisting, shifting tunnel, her flashlight beam flickering as the spirals on the walls pulsed with a ghostly, otherworldly light. She tightened her grip on the locket around her neck, the cold metal pressing into her palm as she forced herself to keep moving, the air around her growing colder, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The tunnel twisted and turned, its jagged walls bending and warping as if alive, the spirals spinning faster, their lines blurring into a dizzying, hypnotic pattern that seemed to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat. Emma's breath came in short, desperate gasps as the tunnel grew narrower, the walls closing in around her, their rough, jagged surfaces scraping against her arms and shoulders as she stumbled forward. She reached a sharp bend in the tunnel, her flashlight beam catching on a sudden flash of movement in the darkness ahead. Emma froze, her heart leaping into her throat as the shadows shifted, the darkness parting to reveal a small, flickering light, its pale, ghostly glow cutting through the gloom like a beacon. She stumbled toward it, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts as the light grew brighter, its flickering glow casting long, twisted shadows across the tunnel walls. Emma reached the light, her heart racing as she realized what she was seeing. A small, flickering candle, its flame dancing in the cold, still air of the tunnel, the wax dripping down its sides in thick, sluggish rivulets. Beside the candle, half buried in the loose, crumbling dirt of the tunnel floor, lay a small, battered notebook, its cover faded and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Emma dropped to her knees, her hands trembling as she reached for the notebook, her fingers brushing against the rough, cracked leather of the cover. She flipped it open, her eyes widening as the familiar, looping script of Lily's handwriting stared back at her, the words twisted and broken, their meaning lost in the frantic, desperate scrawl of her best friend's final message. Emma clutched the notebook tightly, her breath catching in her throat as the candle beside her sputtered, its flame flickering wildly as the air around her grew colder, the darkness pressing in on all sides. She flipped through the pages, her eyes darting over the frantic scribbles, the half-finished sentences, the desperate, terrified words that filled the notebook from cover to cover. At the very back, scrawled in thick, jagged letters, was a single, haunting phrase, "I'm still here." Emma's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest as the candle beside her sputtered once more, its flame flickering wildly before finally going out, plunging the tunnel into darkness. But as the shadows closed in around her, Emma tightened her grip on the notebook, her mind racing with the echoes of her best friend's final, desperate message. She closed her eyes, the locket around her neck pressing into her skin as she whispered into the darkness, her voice raw and broken. "I'm coming, Lily. I promise." As Emma emerged from the dark tunnel, her body bruised and battered, the morning sun broke through the twisted branches above, casting warm, golden light across the damp forest floor. She clutched the battered notebook to her chest, her fingers trembling as she took a deep, shuddering breath, the cool, crisp air filling her lungs and chasing away the last echoes of the darkness she had left behind. She stumbled toward the edge of the clearing, the ancient stone circle now silent and still, its spirals etched into the ground like the ghostly fingerprints of a forgotten past. Emma paused, her gaze lingering on the stones, their twisted lines whispering secrets in the cold morning air. With one last, lingering look at the forest behind her, Emma tightened her grip on the notebook, the weight of her promise still fresh in her mind. She had faced her fears, braved the darkness, and uncovered the truth. Lily's voice still echoed in her mind, a soft, haunting whisper carried on the wind. As she made her way back down the overgrown path to the cabin, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees, Emma felt a strange, quiet peace settle over her. She had kept her promise. She had found her friend, even if only in spirit, and brought her memory back into the light. Emma took a deep breath, her heart lighter than it had been in years, and whispered into the morning air, her voice carrying through the trees like a gentle, hopeful prayer. "I found you, Lily. I found you." Thank you for joining me on this thrilling journey into the shadows. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more spine-chilling tales and gripping mysteries. Stay tuned for the next adventure. And remember, sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in the most familiar places. Until next time, keep your flashlight close and your courage closer.